Thank you so much. And yeah, just to reiterate what was said, that although we have a panel up here and we have some sort of prescribed questions that we're going to be going through, we want to invite all of you to chime in. I'm a big fan of chaos, and so I have no problem with a chaotic conversation. That's why I've gone into clinical psychology. And so we're all good. I won't be offering any free therapy, but we will be having some conversations, and I would like all of you, if you have things to share, to be a part of that conversation. So we'll kind of facilitate the conversation and be part of that, but really we invite all of you to engage with us. As was mentioned as well, there's a little card there that is describing the Thrive Network. And if you were interested in this subject for today, or if you'd be interested in hearing more about that, there's some information on how to become involved in it. As I mentioned, I'm a clinical psychology lecturer, but I'm also the lead for this research cluster through the CDCS, in which we are trying to understand practices and approaches and innovative kind of ideas and strategies on how to promote academic well-being across the whole academic community. In addition, we are wanting to develop this Thrive Network as a way to share best practice for things that are happening in your universities or in your places of work, and whatever kind of setting that you're part of, in which you are seeing real good examples, good practice of implementing well-being in the academic community. So we invite you to be part of that network if you're interested. There is information on how to join that. There are no obligations, no fees. We might ask you to sing, but otherwise you are just really there to absorb. It's a space to have a conversation, which I hope is what we're going to do today. So that's a little bit about me, and I'd like the panel to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ruthanne Baxter. I'm in the Library and University Collections side of things, and I'm the Civic Engagement Manager for the Heritage Collections. And I'm here predominantly because I created a thing called Prescribed Culture, which is essentially heritage-based, non-clinical support for health, social care and well-being.
I'm Dennis Relojo-Howell. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel. I'm a PhD student. I'm on my second year, and my research project explores the viability of blog as a digital mental health intervention, specifically to promote resilience. Aside from being a PhD student, I also run a small company called PsychReg, where I publish a range of articles relating to mental health.
Hi, I'm Deb Holt. I am a lecturer and a researcher in positive mental health promotion and health and well-being. And yeah, that's why I'm here today, whatever my other roles might say behind me. Slides on, yeah.
Hi, my name is Davies Banda. I'm the Director of Learning and Teaching within Murray House School of Education and Sport. I work closely with Deb, so if there are difficult questions, I'll be saying, Deb, can you answer that one? So Deb and I have worked closely for now over 2 years. So most of the things that I'll be talking about is collaborative work we have done through the period of COVID. So thrown into the COVID situation, how did we respond to some of that in terms of looking at well-being for both staff and students? My research interest is in international development, so I work around utilizing sport as a tool for development within international development. And one of the key things is the SDG 3, where we look at now key things about mental health. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And because I said I liked chaos, the universe thought it'd be funny. The clicker didn't work right away, so apologies I didn't have this while our panel was actually describing who they were. But again, I really hope that everybody in the audience who brings their own expertise and their own lived experience of well-being, and specifically well-being in the academic community, can join us in this conversation. So we've set aside a few different questions that we as a panel had put together, just things that we felt passionate about and things that we were hoping to have a conversation about. And again, I'd like to go through these questions. If we don't get through all of them, that's okay. This is just the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. So I hope it inspires you to keep talking. The first question is this. That was a dramatic this. Can someone click the thing? Okay, thank you. First of all, I thought it was great this morning's session with Kathy talking about the co-creation partnership It's almost like she was setting up this panel discussion, so that's wonderful. So our first question is this, and I put this to the panel. Assuming, and this is assumption, that student and staff well-being are interconnected, how have we ensured that stakeholders have active involvement in shaping approaches to create a supportive and healthy academic environment? Do we have any examples of that, of really making sure that we are engaging with the students, the people who are part of our academic community?
I'll give it a start here. Okay.
All right.
Like I'd said COVID period was a good time for us kind of to learn, being thrown into the deep end. I was the same maybe with Peter Matheson because no one had been there before in that situation of COVID, and everyone was learning in leadership. So what happened for us, Murray House School of Education, we had just moved, and sport, we had just moved into a situation of new governance, and that governance structure, we had established new posts, and one of the posts was mine. I moved from Director of Undergraduate to Director of Learning and Teaching, and Deb, Director of Quality. And we sat down to look at student well-being at a particular point. But one of the key things we said is staff well-being, these two are interconnected. So we had set up both town halls where we had student voice there. But Deb and I then emphasized that we visited each of our 4 institutes. So we have 4 institutes. So we would go there and sit down with members of staff. Now, the key thing there in relation to that was how do we ensure that there are positive emotions within the members of staff? Or if there are negative emotions, how do we ensure that we are aware of those negative emotions and we support staff going through that? And we did that by providing a platform. So we had platforms for students to speak through Deb and the town halls, but we needed a platform for staff to speak so that we connect the voice of staff to the voice of students. And it's good that you did mention about Kathy, is keynote. So I then decided to reach out to Kathy and ask Kathy to come and do a co-creation workshop. So she came and did co-creation with her PhD student at that time, and it was a very good one because we looked at how do you then engage. She brought several examples from different parts of the world. How do you engage lecturers and students to come to the same kind of platform and then discuss how they are going to do assessment, looking more especially at culture diversity because we have that within our school. Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by this idea of a town hall. Was this something that was done then virtually on a digital space, or could you imagine there being kind of a town hall in a physical space?
When we had the town hall in a physical space, 2 students turned up.
Okay.
This is pre-COVID, and when we had the town halls during COVID, I think students had more concerns and more anxieties. So that took them there, but also it was more accessible, so that we had more attendance. Sometimes we asked for student consents in advance so that staff could look at what they were, and they weren't put on the spot at the town hall. And then we talked through some of the issues that had been raised in a kind of, staff and students together with minutes shared afterwards because not everybody could attend. So, yeah.
And so there was more engagement actually in the digital space for a town hall than prior to COVID. Do you think if you were to do a physical meeting again, we would go back to a couple students, or do you think that there's more of an appetite among the student population to engage with staff?
I don't know, but I'm going to give it a try.
Okay. So watch this space.
Yes.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other examples?
I'd like to address first the questions whether what you call this, the staff and student well-being are interconnected. I'd like to remind the audience of the talk earlier with Tara Gold and Ellen McRae, and they were exploring the notion of what actually makes a university. And I'd like to remind them of what they actually said, that it is actually us that makes a university. So in essence, these 2 things are interconnected. Now, as for the question of what can we actually do to ensure that stakeholders are involved in academic well-being, well, I don't have a specific example, but I have a proposal. Because academia in general is quite obsessed with league tables, I think it would be good if we come up with some league tables that would actually, highlight the works that being done with that involves co-creation. And I think co-creation would be a recurring theme here, because we really heard some fantastic examples from Kathy Bovril earlier. And I was just wondering, like if we have that league table, probably university will be much more compelled to take actions and how they could involve students when it comes to co-creation. And there are already some universities which are doing fantastic work, as Kathy has highlighted earlier. I also like to share my own example. The University of Pittsburgh, they have what they call SOVA. I forgot what it's called, but it's basically a blog-based platform where they encourage their staffs and their students to write something about their mental health in a blog form. And I think that is a good intervention. That is a good example of co-creation, because it might just be a form of a blog, but actually a way to generate conversations on how we could actually improve the academic environment.
And not to put you on the spot, Dennis, but I'm going to put you on the spot. That's part of what your PhD is about, right? You're doing research and looking at how that sort of dialogue contributes to well-being.
Yeah, and I'm quite grateful because I have to acknowledge that you're my research supervisor. So
okay, we've just outed ourselves.
Thank you for shaping the trajectory of my research project.
Oh, you're welcome.
The marketing officer.
Any other examples or things where we can talk about co-creation? And again, I just want to invite people from the audience as well, if there's examples that you have where you can kind of highlight a real pragmatic example of co-creating with students and staff. Anybody want to share? Yes. I think she's going to come with a microphone for you.
So I'm very inspired to hear about the blog there, and one of the things we're doing at the vet school as part of the mental health committee there is to develop a blog. What you're suggesting though in terms of practicing vulnerability, bringing staff and students together to share their struggles, if that's the right word. I'm trying to be careful with languaging, but there's something there that is part of learning together. And I'm just kind of wondering to what extent you've actually mapped this out as to how to foster this and actually normalize it. So one of my biggest hopes for well-being and mental health going forwards is that we just completely normalize it, because there is such a big shame. It's a ball and chain really that goes along with opening up. So I guess I'm just wondering what sort of examples you're seeing, or what sort of roadmap you're seeing that would allow that kind of blog to actually appear here in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually asked that question, because so I have the opportunity to tell you more about my research project. So in particular, my research project explores the viability of using blogs as a resilience intervention. And I think that's also one of the aspects that I believe we will be exploring this at a later stage. That when we talk about mental health, we seem to be focusing on the negative aspect of mental health. I think you're looking for the word stigma earlier. But actually, when we're talking about mental health, we can also frame it in a positive way. And as a PhD student myself, I'm looking for ways on how we could actually help people flourish. Now, to answer your question, when it comes to blogging, basically you're giving people the opportunity to be involved within a community. Now, obviously, it won't work for a lot of people. There are other factors that we have to consider. Some people may find blogging boring. But we also have to think that sometimes it also matches certain personality types. And how we can implement that as an academic community, the viability of it is that we're actually teaching young people that it's okay to speak. I know we've heard that a lot of times, but it's actually these little platforms, these conversations that generate conversations. And conversations when it comes to mental health, without sounding cliche, they're really important.
I like the focus on stigma, and I think when we think about that relationship in the academic community, the partnership between staff and students, and when I say staff and students, I mean academic staff, professional staff, support staff, people who are doing building services, people who make this university run, the people who are invested into working here and contributing to this community. There's a conversation, there's a mentoring, there's a relationship that happens between people in that community. That's why we call it a community. And the question is, to what extent, for those of us who are, I'll speak for myself, older, people who have been in the field longer, people who have hopefully have some life experience, to what extent then do we feel that it is partially our responsibility as educators to be somewhat vulnerable and somewhat transparent, and obviously in an appropriate way, with our students about issues around well-being? If we are going to take away the stigma, then we probably need to not be academics who arrive on, you know, the wings of angels and sit down in front of the pulpit and begin speaking as though we are somehow anointed in a way that is not human. And when our students don't see us as human, they don't see the human side of suffering, the human side of flourishing, the human side of well-being in any of its forms. And so in my sense, there's a component of it, and again, I realize this is a very tricky subject, but for me as an academic, pragmatic thing that I do is that in my lecture rooms, and I have some former students in here as well, I am transparent with them about my life. I share stories about my family. That's my choice. That's not a template that everyone needs to follow. But I believe that my failures and my hardships and my difficulties are gifts to my students. They're things that allow them to understand and see the road that I have been on, and hopefully encourage them to be more honest and authentic with who they are. So for me, I think vulnerability, whether that's a blog or conversation in classroom, is a part of it. Yes.
No, that really resonates with what I do, and I suppose because I'm teaching about well-being in education, for the last 10 years or so, I start my sessions by modelling that very thing that you're talking about. So I'll say, actually, I'm really nervous today, you know, and I'll say it to the students rather than pretending that I'm not nervous. And so, and this is what I did to get rid of my anxiety. Yeah. And then we move on with our teaching. But it's actually much easier for, I find that students are more, everybody is more receptive to me talking about how I feel now than they were 10 years ago. So I think we're beginning it is beginning to be more acceptable and more, you know, heard, and less of a sort of that weird Deb again kind of thing going on. You know, we are talking more about our feelings and bringing it into our lectures. And I acknowledge that it is easier when you're talking about emotions to share your emotions than perhaps if you're talking about maths. But the other side to what you were saying, Mark, as well, that it's about feeling safe in that community group. So we need to build the relationships with the team, whether that's students and colleagues, and make it feel like a safe place for other people to talk about how they're feeling. Until we've got that kind of safe feeling in our seminars or our lectures, it's much harder for people to speak out. I start every lecture now by I tell them how I'm feeling, and I ask, how are you feeling? And if it's electronic, they can jot down how they feel on the whiteboard. If it's real, they can talk to each other about it, they can talk to me. But we always start now by talking about how we're feeling, and then we move into whatever it is we're talking about.
And there's actually research from the University of Washington has something called the Resilience Lab. And one of the things that they found is that lecturers, educators who start a lecture, even when there are 300 people in the room, and they ask a question like, how are y'all doing? How's everybody? You might think, well, that's ridiculous. You're not going to get 300 answers. You know, maybe they can type it out and everything, but what's the point of doing that? Well, obviously, you're probably not going to get everybody's response. But it's one tangible thing that allows the students to think, well, maybe that person actually cares about me. Maybe that person is actually interested in how I'm doing, and not just, you know, how my critical thinking is on an essay. And so I think there's something about some of the research behind this that shows that when educators take very small, incredibly almost microscopic steps to show a sense of compassion and empathy and care for their students, that it has an effect not only on student well-being, but student engagement, academic performance, and so on. And we could go through the research, you know, for the next 5 hours about that. But it's really interesting stuff to see even those small things. So just you saying, I'm feeling nervous, is maybe something. I think this kind of leads into our second question. If I'll give it a go here, if I can do it. If not, no, still chaos. About some pragmatic, practical things that we do to try to support not just student well-being, but well-being among staff, well-being across the academic community. And we've shared a few examples already, but do we have any others that we could share that are some real pragmatic examples?
Can I take this one?
Of course.
Prescribed culture, as I said earlier, has now sort of defined itself as 3 main programmes, and it's really based on social prescribing and the idea that we can use community-based assets to support people's mental health and well-being. And as you were saying earlier, the whole idea of the sort of the humanness of us all. And one of the programmes is Unlock and Revive, and it's specifically designed for people living with dementia and brain-related conditions. So I'm sure somebody in this room has somebody who they know or a family member who has dementia. So it was really sort of created partly for just the academic community, for we are all part of a family. So the other lovely thing with that is that there are opportunities for staff and students across university to basically be a guest guide on Unlock and Revive. What it is just 15 minutes sharing your passion about anything in heritage. So long as you're passionate about something, it could be the Fourth Bridge, it could be Sir Walter Scott, and then we bring it down to 3 questions that helps the person at home to sort of have a wee think back in their story. So for example, a fortnight ago I took them on a visit to the Anatomical Museum. I was very careful to leave out anything gory because we do this in the morning. So it was, one of the questions was simply, does anyone in your family work in the medical field? Have you ever broken a bone? Would you like to share that story? So it's using heritage, but as a trellis to just allow people to tell their stories and connect. And that's open to staff and students. So that's one way of helping yourself and helping others.
Great.
As for me, I'd like to reinforce what Deb has pointed out earlier. Essentially, when we're talking about promoting academic well-being, I think we really need to make vulnerability more visible, failures much more visible, because academia, by default, is a hyper-competitive environment. We compete with everyone. We compete with everyone when it comes to PhD placements and looking for jobs. So really hearing from people of positions such as Deb and everyone else, it really highlights that it's not really a linear journey, it's not a linear trajectory. You don't just miraculously end up with, a lecturer position. Just last month we invited, at a PGR conference, we invited Dr. Laura Jenkins at Loughborough University. And I really admire those lecturers who are confident when it comes to sharing their journey. That's not really linear. They struggled looking for a job. Dr. Jenkins from Loughborough, she shared like it took her 2 years to get an academic position. And that's really something, hearing from PhD students, that it's not really a smooth journey when it comes to looking for an academic career. And in relation to that, there's something that I do when it comes to, I have my website, and on my website there's a section there where I put CV of failures. You've probably come across of it. I think it's from Dr. Johan something. Just Google it. But I like the notion that we actually make our failures visible. Yeah, like I highlighted there how many universities I applied before I ended up with a PhD. I highlighted there how many grants I put, and just making those visibles. Just even with PhD students or lecturers, it gives encouragement. It gives it makes people think that I don't really have to be perfect, because like perfectionism over competition, I think that's one of the greatest contributing factor when it comes to damaging mental health within the academic community. Yeah. I think if we have to promote a positive academic academic community, we have to highlight that it's not really smooth. You don't just get a lot of publications. There's a lot of rejections. And thank you, Deb, for making those failures much more visible. And I do encourage people who have made it to just make your failures more visible, because you're not just doing it for yourself, but you're also doing it for other people who are looking at you. And I think that's one simple factor that we could do to promote academic well-being.
Dennis, I like what you said about competition. I think all of us in this room probably are very well aware of competition, not only for students to get places at the University of Edinburgh, but competition between staff as well. And it's perhaps the thing that we don't like to mention, because it does have a lot to do with the workplace environment, and it has a lot to do with the sense of trust that we engender when, if I'm encouraging you to be vulnerable, but you feel like this is not a place that I can be vulnerable, well, then you're not going to be vulnerable. It's as simple as that, right? And you can forget all this nonsense about well-being. So, and Harriet and I were on a team that helped lead a paper looking at well-being in the curriculum. And I think one of the things that, maybe I should let Harriet speak for herself, but one of the things we mentioned was the nature of the competitive environment and the nature of the stressed environment. Would you be willing to share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we were keen to get into that paper was... sorry, thank you. Thanks very much. So one of the things that we were keen to get into that paper is the extent to which students coming up to university arrive, in a sense, already damaged by the very high emphasis on achievement and the hoops they've had to jump through in order to get here. So are already conditioned in a certain kind of way, and therefore arrive with that sense of achievement that Chris from Japanese Studies spoke really well to that at the panel on student vision this morning, for those of you who were, I think he was articulating quite a lot of that aspect of, and that it sort of makes, I mean, Chris's point was that it makes for conservative learners in terms of quite tunnel vision about what it means to achieve well, but it also makes for very anxious, highly anxious learners, and some of the students and potential students that I've spoken to during COVID are saying things like their brains are really fried already before arriving at university, because they haven't felt able to let up at all in that 2-year period, because exams were cancelled, school exams were cancelled, the sort of public exams, and therefore they didn't know which assessments counted, and therefore they had to be on it the whole time, and they're just exhausted by the time it got to the summer before university. Yeah. And while I've got the mic, can I mention another example?
I thought you were going to sing, but it's okay. Go ahead.
You can never go back now. Which is the Abundant Academy, which is really looking at some of the toxic elements of emphasis upon productivity and relentless and trying to deliver when you're running on empty. So it's really trying to reverse some of that and emphasises replenishment before anything else. And so we spent a whole semester of a 2-semester programme on a foundation of replenishment. So
I can say that I have done the Abundant Academy. It is absolutely brilliant. I thought I was self-aware, and then I realised I wasn't as self-aware as I thought until after that. It's really good. Highly recommend.
Please.
Yeah, just to go back to the conversation that was happening around vulnerability, was the word being used, but then actually what I was hearing were examples of challenge, adversity, failure, which for me are quite different things. So I suppose I was just wanting to check out the language that we use and why we're using it, because I'm pretty sure that my students aren't really that interested if, well, I'm sure they'd be very interested actually, but I'm not sure it's helpful for them if they know my partner's just left me, my dog's just died. I think sharing those sorts of vulnerabilities are quite unhelpful for students actually. So there's something about sharing experiences which speak into resilience and speak into a process of integrating difficult experiences as part of life, as an inevitability, as recognising limitations. So no one's perfect, everyone's flawed. But there is also something about, particularly with students who are coming in quite anxious, it's not helpful to also communicate unhelpfully our own anxieties or our own distresses of things that are happening in our lives. So yes, just wanting to clarify that, because there was some, the terms were used interchangeably, which I found perhaps slightly confusing.
And I think I'm glad that you pointed that out, because in a lot of ways vulnerability is incredibly subjective. So whether talking about vulnerability, which could be emotional vulnerability, talking about our partner leaving us and being anxious and so on, versus a sense of transparency, sharing things about our lives without being hidden around that. The language that we use, I think, as individuals to describe that is something that really is an individual decision. That's not in our job description. You must talk about your feelings with your students, or staff must be open about these things. This is not part of what we're expected to do. the question is, in a sense, to what extent can we allow some of that conversation in an appropriate way, that of course that we need to judge as professionals, and students need to also be able to communicate what they are interested. They may not want to hear. I've had students, by the way, on my feedback cards, we don't care about your kids. You know, of course, then there's a bunch of other students say we do care about the kids, and so you know, I've got 2 sets of cards. Which ones do I listen? I just kind of go with my gut. But the truth is that, you know, that navigating that fine line is always a challenge. I think for those of us in education is to what extent. Personally, for me, I use this principle, which is, am I sharing this because I need to get this off my chest? I just need to vent. Well, there's probably better places to do that. I can speak with my partner, I can speak with my friends, I could call up a counselor. There's lots of places I can get my needs met. But if by sharing this, I feel my judgment is this is something that is inspiring or helpful or useful for their own personal development, then that's when I choose to do it. But that's my metric, and I think everybody has to have some guess.
I tend to agree with that. I think I do a lot of storytelling, and I've always gotten away with it. I use a phrase, I'm an African, I tell a lot of stories, so just bear with me. So I tell my students that, but the key thing is I use stories to set a context. So I want to deliver a point, and I use stories. I use stories of my own success sometimes when I've a background in coaching, and my coaching stories are the worst ones because I wasn't a successful coach. So I coached a national team, and I wasn't successful in that. So I used those to look at where I failed. But I used my kid's story because I coached my own son in basketball, and he went on to do good, and all the medals I have or whatever in my office, my study at home, belong to my son, not from my coaching. So I use the 2 stories to kind of emphasize or create a context so that then there can be that openness to say he has failed in this area, and he's reflected more. So that reflection. So how do I create a positive environment where people can be open about certain things that can be uplifting to others? That's a key thing. But there are times when I've shared a story and I've realized, what was the point of that, Davies? Was that just about to say something good about yourself and all that? So what's the point in that? So there are times when, as teachers, because we reflect a lot, there's always that reflection. So stories that I've carried, and it's come up also in my student feedback. Some of them says, we love your stories, don't stop, Davies. Some that would say, can we just
wrap it up?
Use the time for the lecture, not your stories?
Yeah. I think you had your hand up earlier, sir.
Yes, it was actually relevant to what you spoke earlier about working with people and providing different options for them, or even experimenting a little bit. I'm curious if any of you give any thoughts towards where to set a goal or to identify where someone's feeling a maximum amount of stress and find a way to give a new perspective towards it. One thing that worked for me through the pandemic was actually looking at different quotes or proverbs from either individuals or cultures, and that impacted how I looked at my own work. If I could share a couple of them as an example.
Please do.
Coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, working together is success. As academics, success for us is when we're recognized, when we submit something, and usually feedback or critical feedback is a very special kind of headache. That could still qualify, though, as cooperation, though, working together, which is a milestone of success in its own right. To quote another individual, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of those overcoming it. Helen Keller.
Thank you very much.
Could respond to that.
Yeah, please
so
do.
what we did within the School of Education and Sport, when we hit the period of COVID, we had set up a student experience and student support. What do we call student experience, student support? Then I'm in charge of the program directors forum. Now we are a big school. So within the program director forum, it's meeting every Wednesday, 9 to 10. And I disliked those because I had to wake up early in the morning and prepare for those and to interpret the regulations because there were no regulations coming up. The point there is we had two meeting. So a Tuesday one for students, a Wednesday one for staff. Now, it's creating an environment where we are listening from the voice of students, we are discussing student problems and how do we go unpack those students, those problems to staff, and create an environment where staff feel there is that collaborative professionalism in solving the problems, that they have an involvement in decision making. At some of them, it was just about passing just the regulations. This is what has come from college. And people sometimes hated just me going there and saying, these are the new regulations. But we would have done that and still would follow up with Deb and say, let's go then to particular institutes to give people kind of a platform to challenge where they feel like their autonomy has gone away. Their pedagogical autonomy had been kind of stifled or constrained by the regulations. And it was a challenging thing, but that helped us going through that. So that coming together and working together and collaboration, that really helped us as a school. Yeah.
That's great. Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. The microphones.
Hi. In terms of a little story, I used to work with someone in a global standards organization. He's a big honcho in Hewlett-Packard. He's from Canada. He'd always talk about the moose under the table, which is the thing that's being talked, nobody's talking about. And Mark mentioned something which, and everybody skirted off and started talking about students again. You mentioned competition between staff and the pressure that puts on you, and everybody very quickly changed the subject again. So I want to bring the moose out from under the table and say, hey, what about this problem of competition between staff and the stress that puts on staff? And I don't have an answer to that. I think there are other universities where there's maybe less pressure on that. And maybe this is related to that, hey, we're number 15 in the world and we've got to get that research output in there and so forth. And what do you do? To quote Chile Biafra, how many units did you shift today? How many papers did you publish this year? There's that pressure. So I guess I'm kind of challenging you, picking up on what Mark said, to address that point.
I would share a personal story as well that I hesitate to say where this was because you're all going to roll your eyes and go, of course, but this was a university in California. Go ahead. The equivalent of kind of what we refer to as the president of the university did an all-staff sort of welcome, and he said, this year I want to give something to you, and he gave us a get-out-of-jail-free card. And he said, I want you to try something outrageous this year, something ridiculous, something that doesn't make any sense, and if you fail dramatically, assuming you don't break the law, here is your get-out-of-jail card. And I give you the permission to fail boldly this year. And I remember getting my card, and I sort of failed boldly. I did a video project that kind of went a little haywire at some point with students. I didn't want to do an assessment, didn't want to do an essay. And it didn't go so well, but I just said, well, this was my get out of jail free card. And it started a conversation among the staff of, one of the things that Kathy mentioned in her, we're referencing Kathy quite a bit here. What it mentioned is do we have the imagination, in a sense, to be creative, to imagine kind of a different form of education, a different form of pedagogy, and so on. Mm-hmm. And I think we do have the imagination to do that. Sometimes I think our workplace environments don't encourage that. And sometimes, if we're honest with each other, we would rather succeed than fail. And succeeding means, ref outputs and league tables and promotions. And nowhere on the academic promotion that I see, can you list one of your biggest failures and what you've learned from it? Mm-hmm. So the truth is that, one of the things that I mentioned, the Resilience Lab, which is just one of many places around the world that are trying to look at resilience in the academic community. One of the things they said was that they had first tried to do student well-being, and they thought, well, we'll do all these things. And what they found is that it was pointless, because the staff were unwell. And they found that until they actually got, the staff are saying, I'm supposed to be talking to my students about being stressed. I'm stressed. I'm not making it. I'm not doing well. How am I supposed to be a mentor for them when I'm struggling? And so they put the emphasis on staff well-being first. And as part of that, saw an outcome in the student population. It's the kind of thing, and I see on people's faces that I'm maybe hitting a moose. But one of the things that I would suggest is that if we don't foster healthy community among staff, this is all just strategies and PowerPoints. And really we have to think about how can we recreate a real community among us, all of us here, which is why I think that's an important thing. One of the things I found early on when I would lecture is that I would talk, oh, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed. And students would, when they wanted to meet with me for a tutorial, would apologize. Sorry, I know you're really busy. Can I just have just a few minutes of your time, please? And I recognized, what I'm sending the message of is I'm overwhelmed and I can't handle this. And it wasn't that I needed to hide that. I needed to get to grips with that because they were the priority, and my time with them was what I was supposed to be doing, not the answering emails. So I just think that this is a good moose to take out from under the table, and we're not going to solve it today, but I think we need to acknowledge that that's a reality. We have the microphone, yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I absolutely agree that about the importance of sharing failure and being able to feel vulnerable as well. But I think to some extent, and for some people, that ability to fail is a privilege, and the consequences of failure and vulnerability are very, very different. And there's a whole host of factors that come into play there. So how can we address that? How can we've spoken a lot about the creation of spaces that allow people to take these risks, but these risks are very, very much not equally distributed. So how do we address that? What can we do about that?
It's a good question. I think that's the thing that we need to think about, is that these are real issues, and we don't want to minimize the challenges and the struggles that people face. We don't want to minimize the impact that in certain environments failure is embraced, and in others it is a way that becomes destructive. And how do we change that narrative? If there is a syndemic of failure causing groups of us or people or just individuals to be outcast and somehow not be invited as part of, especially an academic community, how do we reverse that? And so what are, this is for the panel, and I invite, of course, all of us as well, what are ways that we've kind of had to face those barriers, those challenges?
I just also like to add to your answer, because I think there's also an element of culture here. Speaking from, I have a bit of Chinese ancestry, and in Chinese culture, success is really highlighted, and we try to, hide our failures. So it's easy for, I suppose, it's easy in Western cultures just to highlight how you failed, but in Southeast Asian culture, that really puts a barrier to us. I was speaking with one of my colleagues earlier, Paul Chan. She's from Hong Kong, and I'm from Philippines with a bit of Chinese ancestry. And we're saying that all of these cultural factors actually contribute to you not talking about your mental health. Because if you're familiar with the Asian culture, it's not really something that we talk about. But as soon as we come here, I came here in the UK about 2013, we just kind of overwhelmed how openly you talk about mental health. And it's not something that we talk about in our culture. So I think that's also one thing that we have to acknowledge, that if we're working as an academic community, as a global community, that we also have to, lend a helping hand to other communities and how they can actually promote academic well-being within their own institutions.
Can I'm kind of jumping away from what you've just said, slightly back to a different response to the question there, but I suppose in some ways I have a role in our school, which is the Widening Participation Champion, which puts me in a perhaps a privileged position. So I'm always championing people who have, might come under the definition of a widening participation student, or they might not, but people who are experiencing difficulties and fail for certain things. And from our perspective, it's why have they failed? Is this an artificial barrier that the university has put in place? And if so, how do I get rid of it? How do I mitigate that? And as I said, in a position of some privilege, being the widening participation champion and being on various committees, I can work to flag things up or to reduce things. There's some systems I can't change. There's lots of systems I can't change. But even raising the profile, this is preventing these people, therefore it's discriminatory. So, I mean, that's not the whole question, but that is one side of things. Those of us who can do something should be doing something to make sure that failing that could be avoided, those kind of failings are minimised.
It's like removing structural inequalities.
Absolutely, yeah. That said it all in a much shorter time.
Just want to make sure we heard from someone who hasn't spoke yet. So yes, you in the back. Sorry, it's a bit of baton passing with the microphone.
Sorry. Hi, sorry. So I work in the medical school and I'm a senior tutor, and over the last couple of years we've had other students, or postgraduate students, and they work part-time clinically. So we've had a lot of students that have had a lot of challenges. But I must say, I think the resources that the university, the student well-being and all the resources that were available to them were absolutely brilliant. And whenever we referred to students, it was excellent. We did have a member of staff that was highlighted to me that was struggling quite significantly, and I got in touch with the same services to ask if they would be able to contact the member of staff, and unfortunately they weren't able to. Because it was a member of staff and not a student. And it was just really frustrating that the same services, which are absolutely excellent, that are available to students, weren't available to staff. And it's just something that I think going forwards, it would be nice if we were able to make these resources available to members of staff.
I think that's an excellent point that you make, and I think when we're talking about that idea of an academic community, it is very tempting whenever we do these kind of things to put the focus on the student, because of course the student is the stakeholder, the customer, the people that we serve. But if we really believe that it is a relationship that is interconnected, assuming that that's true and that we are part of a community, it can't be one-sided. It can't just be helping out some people of privilege and not of others. And if staff end up being the ones who get neglected, then we need to be conscious of that. And what systems do we have in place actually to support staff in the same way? And can we begin a conversation as a community about how to do that and to think of practical ways? One of the challenging things of putting this panel together is that it's very easy to make the panel about what are the barriers, what are the risks, what are, tell us everything that's going wrong right now. And because there's a lot of that. But we need a balanced perspective of also saying what's going right, what are some things that we can do to maybe speak into that, to address that. So I think that example that you've given, again, I think for those of us who are members of staff here, we can understand that, whether that's a lack of a structure or just a mentality. Yeah. We've had to face that, so thank you for sharing that.
There's an interesting situation with Programme 6 is one of the prescribed culture offers, and it's essentially 6 weeks, 90-minute sessions, and we have partners across the city, so the Botanic Gardens, the Scottish Poetry Library, and the museums we have ourselves. And the summer programme was specifically for postgrad students, because they were sort of the ones that were mostly around. And at one point when it was being advertised, somebody said, is this also open to staff? So initially I went, oh, well, I better check with the postgrads. And I did check in with the postgrads who had registered at that point. And they said, oh, I don't think the staff would like, what if it happens to be my lecturer? So it was this idea of like a group of 8 people coming together. And I think and I don't know, I obviously just got the views of the postgrads, but interestingly they thought, oh, well, the lecturers mightn't like that, because we'd see them as human and that they need support. So it's just an interesting one to discuss.
Yes. We would pass the microphone down, please.
Thank you. Hi, I would like to share an experience I had that I think it creates a very good environment for supports this well-being. So I'm a PhD student at Morehouse, and I'm also now a student representative at SGSSS, Scottish Graduate School of Social Science. And about 1 month ago, we had an event called Student-Led Symposium, and during that event, there was a session called Human Library Living Session. Yeah, so the concept is that every human being is a book, and we have about 6 or 7 sessions, and group of people. So in each group there will be one person leading the discussion, and I was there for a session called Mental Health. And as Dennis just mentioned, because I'm a Chinese, and as Chinese people, we are not really used to talking about these mental health issues in our culture. But as long as I'm in that environment, and when I start to expose myself to the other people, I get this resonance from other people and responses. And I think the responses, we don't just stay there with the vulnerabilities or the hardship we went through, but we start to think about how we can improve things, how we can make things better. For example, about for PhD students, like supervisory relationship and how to deal with the ethics application, things like that. And I think if this thing can be duplicated to undergraduate or postgraduate taught students, they can cover many more areas, such as, of course, mental health and international students' experience, just like that. So yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to say is we can create this kind of environment, and as long as you are in that environment and you feel that you can expose yourself to other people, then yeah, we can create this thing and think collaboratively how we can make things better. So yeah, that's what I want to share. Thank you.
For that, I appreciate that, and I think that with respect to the time that we have, it's because it's now 4 o'clock, we probably need to put a pause on that conversation. However, I hope that you're like, I don't want to pause on this conversation. I want to keep talking about this. And that's great, because on July 5th, right? Yeah. Okay, recommend the date. July 5th, we are doing a workshop that we're putting together to have a longer discussion about some of these issues. And we invite each and every one of you to be a part of that. And if you are interested in registering for that event, again, it's through this Thrive network that is on the cards that some of you have. If you don't have a card, I have more up here on front. And I would encourage you, again, if this creates a sense of passion for you, if this creates a sense of urgency, if it creates a sense of desire to make a difference, please join us in that conversation. And again, I think by working together as a community, we can begin to try to change some of the things that are there, and hopefully continue to try to improve well-being. So I thank everybody for being here today. I really appreciate it. And of course, I thank the panel as well for there is a bit of vulnerability having to come up in front of people and talk. And so I appreciate your willingness to take that risk. And so thank you everybody for being here, and enjoy the rest of the time.